Can we do a roll call?
Vice Chair Alchick?
Present.
Commissioner Lowing?
Sorry.
Commissioner Lowing? Chair Riggs?
Here.
Commissioner Rupovar?
Present.
Commissioner Suma? Present. Commissioner Templeton?
Present.
And Commissioner Walfogel? All 7 present.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. See, we've got full house tonight. Great to be here. Thank you to staff for the great report. We have 2 items tonight. I think that what we'll do is we'll ask for any comments that are about things that aren't on the agenda, and then what we'll do is we'll hear from staff. And once we hear from staff, we can comment on the agenda items if there's any people in the public that would like to comment on those specific agenda items. So do we have any comment slips for things that aren't on the agenda?
No.
So maybe I'll turn it over to you, John.
Yeah, for the official report, then just a couple items to note, and you may have already followed this from the City Council. I think the Planning Transportation Commission may have reviewed some component of the downtown garage, the environmental report or something. So the City Council had approved the ARB entitlement and certified the environmental impact report, but postponed any action on authorizing any additional work through the contract to advance the project. And the idea was to pause on that while the city explores its broader parking management strategies for the downtown area. So as we have more information to report on that, we'll share that with you. And then also on the council agenda was the discussion regarding the downtown non-residential cap, and this is one that the commission did consider and had recommended against. The City Council did approve the removal of the 350,000 square foot non-residential cap for downtown, and so that will be adjusted on the second reading and be effective, probably in about 45 days or something from now. Along with that direction, they asked us to take up some additional studies, which we anticipate doing as part of the downtown coordinated area plan, which we're hoping to launch in winter, next winter. So that concludes the report.
Questions from commissioners?
Chair? I'd just like to say an official congratulations to now Director Late, who joins us tonight for the first time. So congrats.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, you can't clap in chambers, right?
Thank you, Chair Lake. That was very appropriate. So with that, maybe we'll go into our first item, which is a study session for the Cubberley Master Plan. And I think we have a presentation from staff first, and then if there's any public comment, we'll take that and then roll into feedback and iteration from the commission.
Great, thank you. I'm going to invite Kristen O'Kane to lead us off on the presentation, and we'll go from there.
Good evening, Kristen O'Kane with Community Services. We're here tonight just to share with you some information and what we've heard from the community on our Cubberley co-design process, which we also have been calling a master plan. And I just want to emphasize the word co-design because that's really what it is. We're using all of the community to help us design the future of this site with the school district as well. So the things that we'd like to focus on specifically tonight with the Planning Commission are things like massing, layout of the site, transportation, and circulation. There's going to be a lot more in the presentation on process as well as programming that we've heard from the community. We'll try to focus mostly on those things that you're interested in. So I'm going to turn it over now to our consultant, Concordia. To my right is Stephen Bingler and Bobby Hill, and they're going to lead off on the presentation, and then we're here to answer any questions you might have.
So I think Commissioner Wolford will want you to take the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, just before you go into the presentation, it wasn't really clear from the staff report what the goal of this item is. What are you hoping for us to do besides listen?
We're hoping to just hear feedback from you on where we are at this point. This is a huge project that we're doing collaboratively with the school district and, like I said, with the community. It's going to have major implications to that area because it will be a bigger project than we've seen in a really long time. And so we just want to do a check-in at this point. So there's no action. It's just, how are we doing? What do you think of where we are right now? And do you have any insights on, housing at the site, which is something that we've been hearing, how tall we want to go with our buildings, how we want the site layout to be. It's, like I said, there's 2 property owners, so that adds another layer of complexity with this project. And anything about traffic for vehicles, pedestrians, or bicyclists. Any feedback on that you'd like to share, we would be really happy to hear that. So this is really a study session. We went to council Monday night with the same presentation. We were at the school board last night. And right now we're getting feedback so that later, as we continue forward with the master plan, there are no surprises. And just emphasizing, it is a master plan. So it's not, at the end of this process, we will not have architectural designs. We will have a concept of what this site could look like in the future if we want to take it one step further.
So, and I'm going to suggest for this item that maybe what we can do is listen to the consultants, and then I think what I'd like to do is just go down the line and give input back, because really I think the job of what we need to do today, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's really just to provide that expertise and feedback that they can go and run with. We don't, again, I'm going to put words in your mouth. I'm not sure that we know the process in terms of when this might come back to us. It's a fairly long timeline, but our goal tonight is really to provide that expertise that we do in terms of being the appointed body. Is that a good characterization?
Yes, that's right on. And just I'll make one final comment, that the only funding we have right now is to complete this master plan, that we're sharing those costs equally with the school district. Once the master plan is complete, there'll have to be some decisions from both the city council and the school board as to how we fund the next phase, which would be starting to design and build. So, thank you, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephen and Bobby.
Good evening. Happy to be here this evening. We opened with this slide just to note that initially the scope of the project was to include only the 35 acres. That is the Coverly site. We learned from community members in the first and second meeting that there was concern that the school district did not also include the Greendale and the 525 site, given it's essentially part of the same area. And we're happy to see that both the council and the school district saw the wisdom in that. And then subsequently, prior to meeting number 3, we added those 2 sites, which just gives us a bigger footprint and a bigger canvas to do the planning. So this is a co-design process, as Kristen mentioned. The first phase really focused on program needs and spatial relationships, and then honing that in meetings 1 and 2. And the deliverable from that phase is a programming document, which either you have or you certainly have access to. It was something that's shared with council and shared with everybody that's participated in the process. There's a very robust website that documents everything that we've done, planning for the meeting, the actual meetings, and the results after that. And we do a meeting summary after each document. So meeting 3, which happened just a couple of weeks ago, was where we begin to look at the design direction and aesthetics, and then take that in a longer period of time between meeting 3 and meeting 4, and again, bringing certain expertise to the table to hone the work that needs to be done and evaluated in preparation for the master plan due in for the last round of feedback in May. So the top ideas, we gathered hundreds of ideas from community members in meeting 1. In meeting 2, we actually asked them to prioritize those ideas. I will add that prior to those meetings, we did meet with the Cubberley tenants who are there now, and to understand their needs and their plans, and also to evaluate the square footage that they have at this point and where they may need additional space. All this, again, is documented in the programming document that's available to everybody. You can see here the existing uses at Cubberley, preserved or expanded. The blue is the inside programming, and the green is the outside programming. When we expanded the use to Greendale, we actually are now having conversations about potentially moving, putting a permanent location for the adult education at PAUSD, which is now spread to, I think, 7 to 10 sites around the city. They'd like to consolidate their operations. And then the new Cubberley programs that the community wanted, desired, again, you see the blue and the green, indoor and outdoor. And then with the 525 site, one place for a recommendation for potential staff housing for the school district. So this just gives you a hint of what the document looks like. It's about 150 pages, but it goes into great detail about these different program areas and the requirements. And then the other work that happened was really looking at the massing in meeting 1, and I'm going to pass this along to Stephen to share with you.
We got feedback from the community. As you know, most of the buildings on the Cubberley site now are 1-story. So we got a lot of feedback from the community that they would be willing to get more open space. They would be willing to consider 2 or 3 or even 4-story buildings, which are all fit within the existing zoning envelope, and in order to get more green space. Not yet. Oh, and also they mentioned that they wanted to maximize the green space and put parking underground as much as possible or under the buildings and those kinds of things to get more green space. So we took all of their recommendations and we came up with 3 different scenarios, if we will. One scenario is what we call the independent campuses, which is basically all of the school facilities on one side of the site and all of the community facilities on the other end of the site with a big green space in the middle. And the third one was the building in the park, which is basically everything in one building that would be built in various phases. And the third one was we call the shared village, which is kind of an intermediate sort of hybrid between those two. So by far, the comments that we got back centered more and more on the shared village concept, and they gave us what they felt were the strengths and the weaknesses of those schemes, everything from energy conservation and efficiency to the scale of the buildings and those kinds of things. And so at the end of the day, the shared village concept or direction was voted the number 1 of the 3. And so we moved in that direction to develop for the 3rd meeting. I don't know if we mentioned yet, but there's so far 380 some unique participants in this process in 3 meetings. So all of our meetings have had about 150 to sometimes 200 people. Some people have been to all 3 meetings, and a lot of people have been to at least 1 meeting. Anyway, this is the concept that evolved out of those discussions. The concept in phase 1 would include a health and wellness center, a visual arts facility, 2 gymnasiums on top of each other, a makerspace, a workshop, and upholstery center, performing arts and cafe, the Greendale Elementary School and adult school, then the multi-use space and a kitchen, and then a whole variety of other Cubberley programs, including early childhood and all kinds of arts programs, for example. And then in phase 2, the buildings that you see in red would be the school buildings, because the school district is not sure yet when they will need a new school building, but they want to preserve on this site the right to build of a school building, in this case, which is comparable to Palo or Gunn. And so in the first phase, you see the light blue buildings are the community buildings, the community programming buildings, and the red buildings are the school buildings, and the purple buildings are shared uses. So the gymnasiums would be used part of the day for the school, part of the day for the community, maybe at nights and on weekends by the community. All of those spaces would be shared, and so the taxpayers could get the benefit of those optimizing those public facilities. So in addition to indoor spaces, we also, we also added onto here, there's the future middle and high school, and then also the Palo Alto Unified School District is considering moving their offices to this site to free up some space over at the Palo High. And also they suggested that they want to consider some staff housing, workforce housing for their teachers. And then in addition to the indoor spaces, we have the outdoor spaces, which everybody wanted to preserve the existing soccer and softball fields. There was a suggestion of a skate park, and further, with our further discussion, and we're not sure whether that is going to hold sway or not, but but one thing we can be sure of, pickleball is ahead of everything else as far as I can tell. There's a playground, there's a number of tennis courts, a dog park, a swimming pool, an outdoor exercise area that's associated with the health and fitness centers, an amphitheater, some flexible green space for the community center, and then child care play area for the early childhood center, and then a central promenade that in a way also serves as a kind of a neutral ground between, whenever you're designing, a public school and a public services on the same site. There are all kinds of issues around security and separation at various times of the day that come up. So in a way, we've created this promenade in the center that provides that neutral space where we don't have to have big fences and things like that dividing off things. We did a project similar to this, by the way, in Emeryville, where we put a school, a pre-K to 12 school, and parks and recreation facilities all on the same site. So we've been down this track a couple of times already. At any rate, so then we also have a quad for the school, separate quad for the school, as well as an outdoor cafe and seating area associated with the Performing Arts Center, and then the Greendale Playground. Now, at the end of the day, if we go back and look what the community asked for, which was more open space, we were able, on the same site, where you can see the chart on the left, the green is the green space, and then the dark black is the building footprints, and then the gray is the parking and access roads. We've able to create 59% more green space as a result of the changes in the planning. At the same time, we've more than doubled the square footage on the site by going to 2 and 3 and 4 stories in some locations. The higher buildings are in the center of the site. The lower buildings are on the perimeter of the site. But these are also as requested by the community, as you can imagine. People who live around the site don't want big high buildings, 4-story buildings right next to them. And in addition to that, we've reduced the amount of paving, parking lot paving, by 40% by using structured parking rather than surface parking. And we have also been addressing some of the issues. What you see here are the actual physical property lines. There's 8 acres that's owned by the city and another 35 acres that's owned by the school district. And clearly, in order to implement this plan, there would have to be some changes, which we anticipated in, maybe the city keeps its 8 acres, but it takes a different configuration, realignment of property lines. Bobby?
So just to share with you, at meeting number 3, based on all the information that we gathered, we brought this back to the community and shared this plan. And In multiple activities, we focused on the program, organization and massing, circulation and parking, and the look and feel. So there was a large table sheet that you see here where basically we're asking people, once they've had a chance to look at all of this information and really respond, did we get it? Are we listening to them? Do they see anything that's missing? Are there any additions they would like to have? So what we learned is that we asked if people agree or disagree that the massing model fulfills the community goals for the site. And clearly, they agree that we're moving in the right direction. We also heard, too, that they wanted the pool to be moved away from these neighbors. They thought they would not particularly want to hear the noise and distraction of a pool. So in our iterations that we're working on, that's going to move more to the middle of the site. They wanted to reduce and reconfigure parking structures, so that is in the works as well, and push two-story buildings away more from neighbors, in particular on the north side of the Greendale building. Now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
So another big part of the discussion is, from the very first meeting, as you probably know better than we, had to do with traffic. Traffic and traffic circulation, and I mean, people pulled out their pencils and they really went after it. How many entrances to the site, how much parking, how congested is it going to be? We actually, with the addition of the Greendale site, thought we would have some relief by being able to provide some access from San Antonio Road. But under further investigation that included our traffic consultant, Farron and Pierce, we have concluded that that would not be the best thing for the neighborhood. There's a lot of residential. There would be too much of an impact on those residential neighborhoods. So we've gone back to the original plan of having two entrances and exits off of Middlefield. And there are also a very elaborate system of biking and jogging trails on the site. We have, in the first phase, I should mention that the first phase we assume will be the city's work, because the city has a more urgent need for revamping those buildings or building new buildings. Those buildings are now 60-some years old and have served a useful life. But the school district, on the other hand, doesn't really know when they might need another school. And they know that they don't need it now. They don't need it probably at least for another 10, 15 years. So the school is more of a placeholder at this point, whereas the city's needs are more urgent and more. So we've divided generally into the project into a phase 1, phase 2, based on those distinctions. My guess is that we will end up having phase 1A, B, C, D, and that as we move further into the costing and that kind of thing. So we have in the first phase we have I can't quite see, 950 parking spaces and about 800 bicycle spaces. And then when we expand to phase 2, we have a total of 1,380 parking spaces and 1,800 bicycle spaces. And you can see the layout here. The layout is still very much in flux, in consultation with a lot of the biking people and the pedestrian people. I think Kristen has another meeting tomorrow with that group to continue to refine this plan, but this is the general layout. And then another thing that we learned is that we had originally come up with a plan where the bike parking would be pretty much on the perimeter of the site, and the pure pedestrian would be in the center, but we learned from the city that it would be more preferable to provide more direct bicycle parking more directly related to the uses adjacent to the uses. And I have to say, I'm happy to have a new piece of vocabulary, which I think is awesome, where they explained that those would be called rock star parking spaces. So that's a new part of my vocabulary that I've picked up here in Palo Alto. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bobby to talk about meeting number 3.
So that gives you the background information for the second activity, where we had a similar sheet that gave the detailed information about all of these traffic and circulation options. And again, we asked the community to tell us, where did we get this right? Where would you agree? Where do you disagree? What other things might be added? And what we learned in that meeting is that, does this plan seem to be safe and easy to navigate for pedestrians, bikes, and cars? And for the most part, we got that right. And does parking access look convenient? So again, much of this is we're working very closely with the Safe Routes to School folks and understanding that parking and circulation is a very big issue. So we still have work to do on this, but we're moving in the right direction. What we heard in particular highlights are remove the road that connects to San Antonio, which we've already done, separate bike and car paths, create better bike access to the interior of the site, which we have now done, and keep a walking path that connects Greendale to Fern Avenue. So the last activity was really moving us into some sense of design options and aesthetics and what people preferred. So we have an activity here where we asked for architectural style preferences. We kind of brought up some prominent styles that we see here in Palo Alto and the region: mid-century modern, arts and crafts, mission style, and contemporary high tech. We asked them to respond to specific elements in each of those, like shape of roof, windows, lighting, green space, those kinds of things. And then we asked them to rank each of those 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of their preference. And so here's what we learned, that with 1 being the top winner, the top vote getter, the high-tech, contemporary and high-tech is falling in the number 1 spot, and mid-century modern falling in the number 2 spot. And then the last thing that we did was looking at landscape preferences, everything from the shapes on the site, the actual landscape and hardscape, and actually color palettes for paving and such things like that. And we asked them to give us a response, and actually where we fell somewhere kind of right in the middle. And after every meeting, we do an after-action review. We want to find out people's concerns in the heat of the moment, tell us what's working, and we thought we would share this kind of fundamental question was, do you agree that Coverly Master Plan is on the right track? And 73% of the respondents said that they either agreed or strongly agreed. Just a really quick little, if you've not been to any of the meetings, you can get a sense here of how they're conducted. We do some presentation, but we really want people to be doing the work at their tables and not necessarily sitting with just like-minded people. We think it's very important in this process of co-design that you're hearing from people who have different points of views, you're hearing from people that you don't know, and listening to their concerns so that you can have a better sense of compromise, a better sense of what's going to work for the largest amount of people in the community, and that's how we do the work. And all of our 3 meetings have been held in a similar format. And last but not least, we want to just share with you the role of our community fellows. This is something that we do in projects all over the country. And we're really excited here. I think we have 12 adult fellows, and we have 6 student fellows, 3 from Palo and 3 from Gunn. And these fellows have they're volunteering their time. They've gone through an extensive weekend-long training about a co-design process. And we also meet with them in regular conference calls. And then we meet with them in person prior to every meeting, so they're fully aware of the agenda. They understand the activities. They understand how best to facilitate those activities. We have a chance to give them feedback and answer questions. And then they actually sit at the tables and facilitate that work, and then help us as we move forward to each meeting. They have been incredible. Interestingly, when we chose the fellows and we brought them into the room, they did not know each other. So these are people from across the community who now know each other. And again, our student fellows have been just absolute rock stars. I call one of them the mayor and one of them the senator, and I suspect they'll be sitting in one of your seats before you know it. And so where we are now is we've completed meeting 3. Now we have about a 4-month chunk of time to really refine the work that we're doing and to be prepared to bring these alternatives back on May the 9th. And that will be the last round of an opportunity for community to weigh in on these different options. And then after that, we'll take that information and complete the master plan in the summer of 19. Next meeting, again, is May 9th. We also have, as I said, a very robust website with all the information documented. If anybody can come and participate at any time. They could even come to the last meeting and they would make a contribution. This way, if they choose to really get informed and understand how we got somewhere, they can go to the website and get all that information. But they can still come not knowing anything and contribute. And that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So I think hearing, I don't have any speaker cards, so, and can I confirm that there's no members of the public okay. So with that, maybe I'll open up, I'd like to kind of maybe have a structured deliberation, if that's okay with my agenda. So if we just go down the line, either left to right or right to left, and provide any feedback we might have, or if there's any questions, we just take those one at a time. Is that okay? Sure. By acclamation? Okay. So no offense to Commissioner Wolfvogel, but let's start on my left. That was intentional. No.
Well, by that random flip of the coin, you got somebody who has a lot of experience with Coverly. We dealt with this for years on the Parks Commission, and it's just really heartening to see how far it's come from the original. Had some acronym, CAC, not CAC, but anyway.
It was a CCAC, the Coverly Community
CCAC,
Advisory.
that's right. That was before the CAC.
2012 plan.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's just really good. I would just want to ask staff if in future there's going to be action items coming out of this as the thing progresses. Director? Will this be coming back to us for any action items? I mean, I don't think the zoning is going to change. They don't need a CUP, I don't believe. So I'm just, oops.
So I think there may be an opportunity for the commission to see the master plan again as it makes its way in draft final form on its way to the city council. And as we heard earlier, there's no funding that has been identified for the next piece of this. So we'll have to see where that happens. I imagine, based on what I've seen here, that there's probably some legislative amendments that may need to be made to our zoning map or zoning code. So the Planning Commission would certainly be involved in any process that involves rezoning. And there may be some discretionary entitlements, but I'm not sure at this point whether the commission would be involved.
Okay. Sort of comments on the feedback in addition to those I made years ago. I think it's just absolutely terrific that you're able to get as much new square footage there, because that was always constrained, and it's such a wonderful community resource. So now you're going to be able to get more stuff done there. So I think that was terrific. I know it's more costly, but getting the parking underground in the demand that you heard from folks for more green space is just a phenomenal part of the design. I presume that green space that you quoted is inclusive of the playing fields? Yeah, so that's included in the green space. So I think all of that is terrific. Over on page 18 of the packet, where you rank the top programs by number of votes, that is also very consistent with the Parks Master Plan research that we did, which was massive over the course of about a year and a half. And particularly, just want to point out one thing is the request for gyms, swimming pools, and expanded playing fields, which I think are in about the top 10 here, were always very high. And the particular thing that you capture here, of course, is because of the site. So you have something in the south, whereas those facilities are in the north. So it's a huge improvement to have those major facilities that heretofore have only been in the north. So that's a great addition as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation and all your hard work on this. I am relatively new to Palo Alto and the Cubberley project, so I don't want to play, Monday morning quarterback or anything, but I did want to give you some feedback. Do you feel that you got an adequate cross-section of the community, community's input in this process?
Yes, we do, actually. Although we are doing some additional outreach. In fact, I had a meeting today at Pally High. About 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting at Gunn to get more youth participation. We are also, our fellows are working hard between now and then to try to have more, child-age parents be able to come, even though we know that's a challenge on a weeknight, if you have little children at home. But in doing this work all over the country for a community of this size to have well over almost 400 unique participants in this process, we think, based on our experience, that is a very representative group of people. And I dare say in most other processes in Palo Alto, you've not had nearly that number, traditionally that come and participate. And our model of co-design we do want to bring everybody into the same space at the same time so that they are hearing, and they're not just responding to a survey, they're not just responding from a very like-minded constituents' points of view. So we think it's important to have people in the room together. So we are working hard to have more people come to the last meeting. And again, we have the city has a list that goes out to a huge blast, so does the school district, and they get invited to everything, and they also get updates of all of the work that's taken place thus far, the meeting summaries, the deliverables. So we also believe that we have wide berth in terms of reaching people, at least in that regard.
When do you typically hold your meetings, and how are you sending out? Do you typically hold them during the week?
Yes,
weekdays
actually,
at night?
before in the beginning, we spoke with city staff and school staff and everything and said, what do you think is the most ideal time to have these meetings? And we went around and around, and it was agreed that it would be on Thursday evenings. So it's at 7 o'clock to 9.
Okay. Well, let me just tell you what I'm getting at. So I actually live very close to Cubberley, and I'm in that community, in the group of people who would use this. And to be honest, I was surprised to see the top program by number of votes was adult education, because I walk around and my community is all parents with young children, just like me. So that is somewhat of a disconnect for me. We got letters from the public today, I think 2 letters, indicating that too. I believe Commissioner Templeton also lives in the area. So you can, I think, speak to that as well, if that's your perception of, who are the constituents of the community who would be going to this. Did you want to speak to that quick?
I just wanted to make a point of clarification. I have a note for this myself. By adult education, do you also include preschool family? Preschool family is technically an adult education program, but it's a parent education.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Live with
Yes.
your children. It's very infant to 4-year-old focused. So I think when you refer to it as adult education, it may be misleading unintentionally.
Yes,
But
okay.
I think that may speak to
And
Commissioner
commissioners, if you
Ripper's.
could just try to keep just discipline yourself, because I think we'll be more efficient if we do it one at a time. So
I asked
Just
her.
didn't want to go down a path, trying to be efficient.
Yes.
I asked her. So what do you guys, is that what you contemplate by adult education? What is it going to consist of?
Well, by adult education, actually, I can speak most specifically to that. So right now, the adult education program, that's PAUSD adult ed program, is scattered amongst, I don't know, around 10 sites all around the city. Some of their administration and a very few of their programs are actually at Greendale and on Coverly right now. They would like to consolidate and have their program be, you know, on the Greendale site potentially and utilizing some of the space at Coverly. So for instance, the upholstery is a very strong program that they have. That's an adult ed program. It's a program that happens through the adult ed entity at PAUSD. And so they would be a tenant and provide a variety of programs. I mean, they have, you know, a huge catalog of programs that they do in the evenings after school for adults.
So it's those types of like English as a second language,
Yes.
upholstery classes, you know, knitting. These are the
Right.
types of things that we're talking about with adult education. That's what it's going to be primarily composed of.
Well, I don't, do you have?
Well, I'd like to add to that, some of the things we heard is people were interested in like vocational training for adults. So things, even we're proposing a commercial kitchen. We heard a lot about a commercial kitchen that both nonprofits could use, but also could be used as a teaching space. And, you know, a tech area where people could learn more about technology and apply that to potential, you know, movement in their career. I wanted to point out your comment. So we recognize that the demographic that's been showing up to the meetings is predominantly, I would say, 50 and older. We did some surveying at the last meeting to see what age groups were attending, and it is an older crowd. And we are now making a stronger effort, and our fellows are also making a stronger effort to reach that age group that,
Great.
for whatever reason, because they're busy, they have children, they're not attending. And one way we're doing that is through I'm attending next week the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee meeting at the school district, which is made up of parents of school-age children from the different campuses. So there'll be an initial meeting there, and then just a sort of a push to get them to help us get people involved. It has been advertised to all the schools. The flyers have been hand-delivered to the neighborhood around Coverly. Most of the people attending the meetings live in the Green Meadow neighborhood, but that we've offered childcare, and that demographic is just not getting engaged. So we're doing a major push to get there.
They're trying to survive.
No, I hear you. Yeah, I
They're just
understand.
trying to survive.
And we also have an
weeks.
opportunity for people to provide input online. So if they go to our website, people can, you know, share their ideas, share their feedback to us without attending a meeting at all. So we welcome as much input as we can get from everyone in the community.
That's great to hear. And then I had a lot of issues, questions. But one other issue that I wanted to discuss or point out is, for me as a parent, it makes me really uncomfortable to have school facilities shared with adult facilities. I mean, I think the gymnasium is going to be shared, but then students are going to want to use the gymnasium at night for soccer, or for whatever, playing field, or on the weekends for games. Have you guys thought about that? You know, how to create more of a division where there's not, just for security and safety reasons?
So we have thought about that, and we were just meeting this morning and talking about those exact issues. And we're still working it out. You know, right now, the city, so the school gyms and the school fields are used by the school district during the day and after school, and then the city actually is responsible for renting out their gyms and fields to other users, which include adult groups. So there is some level of that happening now, but it's very, it's very discrete times and it's very controlled. So we're working out those details, and we recognize that is not something that we're accustomed to having those shared uses. But I wanted to ask if you wanted to share the experience at Emeryville Center for Community Life.
And I'll even go a little bigger than that. There's been a movement over the last 15 to 20 years about around this concept of community schools, where taxpayers are saying we can't afford to have a gymnasium for the kids from 9 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and a separate gymnasium for the community where people come at 5 o'clock and leave at 10 o'clock at night and come back early in the morning until 9 when they go to work. So there's a lot of pushback from the community about can we really afford to keep building and maintaining and using a lot of energy, sustainable energy, unsustainable energy to do this. So this is a part of, I guess I would say, that way of thinking. The most extreme version is one in the country is one that we designed in Emeryville, which literally has, a pre-K to 12 school and all these community facilities and a separate community performing arts center and everything all on the same site. I can tell you it's not as easy to design as if you just have everything on two separate sites, but it can be done, and it's being done all over the country in lots of different jurisdictions.
And then in this instance where we're doing it, is it being driven by space limitations or by financial money funding limitations? What's driving
I would say
this?
it's being driven by three things. One thing is cost, another one is space, but the third thing is there's a lot more emphasis now on finding ways to integrate education with community life, so that education is not sequestered from the world, that kids don't feel like they're going to prison every day. So I would say all of those things are a part of the conversation.
I would just add that the name of this is the Emeryville Center for Community Life, and it was designed by the community in collaboration with the school district and the city. They chose to call it that because they wanted to create a there in Emeryville and something that felt like a place for the community and everybody in the community.
And there are just as many issues between having an elementary school and a middle school on the same site and having a middle school and a high school on the same site. And in Emeryville, it's literally pre-K to 12, so you can imagine how complicated that was.
One other issue that I just wanted to point out is I think the packet said that the school district is unsure about whether they're going to do a middle school or a high school. The only thing I wanted to point out is, those are going to have different parking requirements, because I assume if you're having a high school, kids are going to bring their cars versus not. Has that been taken into consideration? I mean, I guess you can't really, you don't know what's coming, so you have to.
Well, we're planning for the high school. We're planning for a high school, but it's interesting you bring that up, because there are also, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of conversations in the transportation business these days about what is transportation going to look like 10 years from now as it relates to driverless cars. And are we going to even need all these parking spaces? In fact, parking garages are now being designed so that they can be, with ceiling heights that make them be able to be converted into other uses, because there's so much concern right now about we're going to have more parking. Some people are projecting, that we'll have parking spaces will be eliminated. So I heard recently somebody said that within 30 years there will be enough space available in downtown Los Angeles for 3 cities the size of San Francisco, because of all of the reduction in parking because of driverless automobiles and ride sharing. So I don't know. We're actually planning for both of those things, I want to tell you, because we're planning very specifically for drop-offs. areas where people can be dropped off by Uber or by Lyft or by driverless cars or whatever. And we're not clairvoyant enough to know where it's going to go, but we just want to be able to provide for both and, not either or.
That makes sense. Two more quick comments, then I promise I'll stop. I just wanted to say I think it's fantastic that you guys are thinking about teacher and affordable housing on campus or on the site. That's wonderful. I think we need it. You know, we do need to provide affordable housing to our teachers because they're such an important, you know, part of this community. And then just a slight issue. I thought it was a little bit odd to have the secure children's like infant play area surrounded by the community. Is that what it is, surrounded by, like the community center spaces? What's that secure children's playground surrounded by? It's a building.
That's an early childhood center that uses the open space in the middle like a donut.
Got it. I didn't understand what that was.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense now. No further questions.
Sure. Vice Chair Alcheck.
All right. So I want to respond quickly to something that she said. I think my kids currently go to a preschool that is also a community center, and they use the gym at the same time as the gymnasium is used by gym members. And so I think it's more possible than we think, and I think one of the this will go into my other comments, but I think one of the biggest challenges that we will have before us is to just demonstrate how possible some of the things that I think you're going to attempt to suggest we do, just how possible those things are will have to be demonstrated to create familiarity there.
Right.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick. I watched your presentation also on Monday, on the Monday night meeting. This is your third one this week. I think that explains why there's virtually nobody in this room tonight on this item. They either were there on Monday night or they caught you yesterday at the
school
It's a school district.
So basically, everybody's heard it except for us. I'm impressed with the outreach. I think, that you deserve credit. I think the city deserves credit. The accommodations that were made to sort of facilitate a greater level of participation, I think, are very impressive. Like, I'd never heard of some of them before, or I've never really seen those in action before, and I'm sort of proud, to some extent, that we took it upon ourselves to do that. And maybe the school district deserves credit there too for making that a priority. And I think that the sort of mixed approach of leading and facilitating the process, the discussion, is commendable also. But before we, pat ourselves on the back, I want to suggest the following. The fact that the plan that we have so far seems to be so well received could possibly mean that it just isn't bold enough. And my advice to council would be to encourage you, this team, to immediately develop a more diverse set of options. We mustn't be afraid of a more diverse set of visions here. I was struck listening to Governor Newsom earlier this week by his directness, his effort to be real on some of the tough issues. And I'm eager to see our leadership acknowledge what our community needs and direct this team to come up with some options that address, or at least attempts to address them, more thoroughly. And I'll say, I think it would be profoundly helpful, for example, if in the next step of this effort, the team began to introduce innovative approaches to community center and rec center design, and recreational amenity design in cities with a far denser standard, right? And what do I mean by that? How are gymnasium, community centers, recreational sites in Tokyo, London, Manhattan, Paris, how are they laid out? And I think a lot of people say, well, this isn't Tokyo. We have higher land prices than Tokyo.
Right.
Right.
It costs more to build, more to buy here than it does in Manhattan.
Right.
So we are Manhattan. We're just not acknowledging it, right? And, there's nothing on, it would be great if we could put the slide that is it's the most zoomed in one of the map, if that's all right. Yeah, right there. Now go back. Yeah. So there's nothing inherently, from my perspective, problematic about this, right? I think it's beautiful. If I were to try to be like Gavin Newsom this week and be real, this is a really super community center / school site. You took with all due respect, crappy, outdated, dilapidated place, and I spend a lot of time at Cubberley. I coach Palo Alto girls softball there. It's a major site for the softball crew. I'm there regularly for whether it's a dance performance by some small group or some other activity. It's actually amazing how many different groups are utilizing that site, and it goes to show how in need we are of that sort of space. But it's kind of falling apart, and never it's hard. It smacks of needing to be updated, right? And this is everything. This is like joining Equinox, like the nice, or better than Equinox. This is like the fancy gym, right? That costs a lot of money, and I think it's great. But I would suggest to you that any development at this site that didn't include at least 100 units of housing, okay?
Yes.
For individuals on the city or the school district's payroll, would be a monumental failure. I hate that you said 2 to 3 stories. I think you're not, I'm not being dramatic here for my own benefit. I'm being dramatic for your benefit. I think we must not be tone deaf. I think the success of this project is much more likely to hinge on its sensitivity to our city's housing crisis than its sensitivity to our proud and vocal pickleball club.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds
No.
funny, but when you said that, I thought, and I really respect the effort you've done, right? But it's like, no one wants to see Northam moonwalk. I'm so sorry that we don't have enough pickleball facilities, and we should. That's on the Parks and Rec Commission. But I think people will pay attention, and I think they will suggest that we failed if this site looks like a fancy gym.
Yep.
And I would suggest to you that if it was up to me, there's too much circulation space here. Not every building needs a quad or a courtyard out in front of it. We should fill in the space between all the blues. And everything should have, I don't necessarily think the model of just putting housing on top of everything else works. I think you can have a housing section and a recreational section and a school section. They don't need to doesn't need to necessarily be on top of each other, like Santana Row. You don't need housing on every section. But to not have an option here that makes some people really upset with you means that you have more work to do, in my opinion.
Cool.
And the pool's location, I know you acknowledged on Monday night that it's moved in some new revision. The pool's location is the least of the concerns for the people who live next door. I love the idea of a nonprofit having space. What nonprofit? What nonprofit is operating? Who's working at this nonprofit? Where do they live? Why would they meet here? They live across the bay. What individuals need to learn about new technology, like retraining, right? That's what you triggered my mind. They're going to get retrained, so they have new opportunities. Who are we talking about? What population? Not to say that there aren't individuals in Palo Alto that are struggling, that maybe need to be retrained in certain fields, but that population is getting smaller and smaller every day because there's no place for them to live and afford to be here. So I'm not suggesting that the site becomes a low-income housing site. I'm suggesting that because of the city's ownership and the school district's ownership, they should prioritize their employees' housing here, and that there should be a sort of an exclusive effort to create that. And I really am excited for you because I think this could be the biggest opportunity for the next 50 years that Palo Alto has to do something impressive, and I think it's awesome to be a part of a project like that. So I'm excited for you. I hope that you continue to have success in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this presentation together and for all the work you've done so far. I've heard nothing but praise from the community members and others that have been involved, so thank you. I have a ton of questions. I love Coverly. I practically spend my life there when I'm not at my house, so, just, I apologize to the commissioners coming after me, but I do have a bunch of questions. Quickly, while I'm looking at this map that we have up, we have little tiny blue things above the purple near the soccer field. What are those? That's pickleball?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So first I want to address the community questions that brought up, questions that the community members brought up. So thank you to Commissioner Rupivar for discussing the diversity of participants. I was a little skeptical of that concern until I saw the video, and yeah, it definitely does appear to skew in one direction, so I applaud your efforts, your future efforts to reach out, and I'm happy to talk offline about ways I think you might be more successful at reaching that group. Will there be a playground that is public in this space?
Yes.
Yes.
And where is that on the map?
Let me see.
You got to go back. You see it, there it is.
Right.
Third down from
Right
the
here,
top.
playground. See where there's the pickleball, then there's a playground here.
Okay, that's
So the
rather diminutive.
Well,
given the size of the acreage.
It looks small, but the scale of this is, let me just give you a for instance.
It looks smaller than a tennis court. Is that correct?
Well,
It's actually about the size of 2 tennis courts.
Yeah? Okay, is the green a tennis court?
Sorry?
Is the green represent a tennis court?
Right. So if you take 2 of those tennis courts,
see, here is pickleball. She's. I see what you're saying. It does look smaller. And
All right, I'll move on.
Anyway, it's there, and it's not actually. I mean, the size of these things are, morphing. So
we can make
yes.
it bigger if you want.
No, I'm asking for clarification because a community member wrote and
Yes.
asked us about it. So I want to just be as crystal clear as possible in case they want to give you future input.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. The safety concerns, I really appreciate Commissioner Rupivar's approaching this topic, and I want to just caution us about inadvertently being too dismissive of that because of our successes in other areas or other communities or trends that are happening. I would encourage you to study the types of police reports that are coming in from this area, but I've been involved in and attending activities at Coverly for many years, and this safety and security issue is serious. It's not a joke. It's not a trend that's going to go away. This is something we need to bake into the design. So I would love to see, as part of the design, some safety measures being highlighted, like lighting and police call box or whatever. Maybe that's future. Maybe we're too early.
That kind of detail is going to happen in the architectural phase, but certainly we can call it out in the plan.
I think it would help a lot of people feel more comfortable with the design. I do understand that we want, and I've heard wonderful things about having space that is used by children and seniors and employees and all of the different parts of life. I've heard wonderful things about it as well, but just so you know, we're having some serious safety issues in Cubberley, just the way it's currently designed.
I think it's a
Okay.
good idea. I know how to do that.
And then you said that the building design that was chosen was either modern or mid-century,
Either
and not
contemporary high-tech or mid-century modern. That was what
perfect.
the
I think there
highest.
was some misunderstanding about that in the community as well. Excellent. And is there any interest in integrating style choices with some of the famous Eichler-type designs that are in close proximity?
That's what mid-century modern is in this context.
Okay, but that was not chosen.
Well, it was the second, it was a close second, so.
So where are we in that decision process? Is it final, or is
No,
people-
not at
okay.
all. We're just getting that initial information so that we can then take that and then draft some scenarios, so.
Excellent. So you're confirming what I read in the notes and in your presentation, but I just wanted to specifically call out some questions that we received. Okay, now on to my questions. So I wanted to ask about the adult school and preschool family, and that infants are part of the design. You mentioned earlier that there's also adult-only classes that will be on the campus and in your vision. But we are designing spaces that are for children and infants as well.
Correct.
Okay. The pool. Swimming is big in Palo Alto. You may have noticed that, and I'm so glad to see a pool involved in the design. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about is, let's imagine that we rent the pool out in the evening to a swim club that is going to have several hundred children going in and out and being dropped off. I understand we're going to move the pool based on this design, but if a traffic consideration for you and flow consideration would be to make sure we have drop-off lane for people, because I think that would be a primary use.
Yeah, as I mentioned, drop-offs are a big part of the next phase, actually, of what we're doing. We have one big drop-off at the end of this promenade. On the other end is a big traffic circle, where we see that as exclusively for dropping off. And we're now looking at doing something similar on this north side of that plaza to increase the number of drop-offs, especially adjacent to the preschool.
Excellent. I think I spend all my time at Cubberley doing drop-off and negotiating, so the more you can do that, the better. There's a lot, I'm sure you know. Anyway, you asked for traffic input. That was my big traffic input. Connectedness to Mitchell Park. This might be part of, I appreciate Commissioner Alczak's urge for you to think bigger. I wanted to see how we would integrate with people. I can imagine people that are going after school to Mitchell Park to the library for a couple of hours and then going to their activity at Cubberley and having that connection. I just did a couple of searches on Google Maps to see, how would a pedestrian or a bike person cyclist access the site, and it wasn't clear that there's some dedicated way to get across Charleston, that there is one that goes through a neighborhood, but we may want to study the impact. I think that was Nelson Drive. So if we do end up having 1,800 bicyclists coming onto the campus, we would, want to make sure that that neighborhood would have minimal impact. I also agree that I would love to see our housing be not just for teachers, but for city employees. It would be very important for the city to do that. And I love the idea of finding creative ways to get more people living in this space. There's been studies, I'm sure you've read all about these things, but when we have a space that is used all day and all night through different activities and flows, we have better safety, and I think it would tie into those other concerns. More about the parking, you didn't mention chargers, but I'm sure that's going to be part of any modern parking design, so just to throw that out there. And then it's too early to really talk about the flow on the site of how people are getting in and out? I didn't see that in the presentation.
No, we do have some diagrams that show that. I don't know
Which
if you wanna
page was it? I was struggling to... Was that the black and orange one at the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see that we have access, 2 points on Middlefield Road, and there's basically a loop that can go either direction. So there are two accesses from Middlefield, and those go into the site, and the bulk of the parking is in a long strip that's parallel to the field, to Nelson. And that's actually under all of those tennis courts and also under what we think is probably going to end up being the location of the pool. So to your point, you could park and go right upstairs and go to the pool. But so that's the bulk of the parking. And then there's additional parking over to the part there that I can't describe it right now. I can't point to it. But
So both of these entrances and exits are two-directional?
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes. So it's a big U through the site, and then we're trying to, as you see on the drawing, you can see that's traffic circle. The traffic circle is actually a pull-off from that, so you don't have to go through the traffic circle. The traffic circle is exclusive for drop-offs.
Great. I did not understand that from your presentation,
here.
so thank you.
Right
That's
there.
wonderful.
And we're looking at doing, there's another one at the other end, and we're looking at putting it a little bit closer to the,
That, does a left turn lane from Middlefield into Cubberley come with your plan?
there is a traffic light.
There is a traffic light.
Yeah, there's a traffic
I
light.
encourage you to go and
Yeah.
drive through that.
Yeah.
Because there's no left turn lane and it really causes a clog.
But we have a traffic consultant that's helping us figure out how to make those intersections be the best they can possibly
And
be.
we're working with city staff in that
Right,
regard, too.
right.
See you nodding. Okay, all right. Well, that would be, I would think, really important for this to not make traffic crazy on Middlefield, crazier. One other thing I didn't see was an acoustic rehearsal space for musical. I saw for performances we have, the performance hall, but is there a space where people that are doing
Yes.
choir?
Yes, there is. Yes,
Okay,
there is.
perfect.
Yes.
Because we need a lot of that in our city. Okay, I think that is everything. Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Suma.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I also was watching Monday night, so, and I'll try not to repeat things that other, my colleagues have said. So, just a couple of questions. Well, first of all, it's great to see this site being considered to be optimized. It's not the most efficient currently with surface parking and one-story buildings. I think a key to its success will be how the transition points with the neighborhood. And with regards to that, I guess I have a preference for more of a mid-century look. And I certainly think with large glass structures, you want to be careful they are typically not safe for birds. And that would be important too. So, and also, I think it's important not to duplicate things that are at Mitchell Park, because it's really rather close. And there's the Magic Bridge, and there's a wide variety of recreational things happening at Mitchell Park. So, one question, Phase 2, when the red school buildings show up, do we lose something?
No.
What was there before? Was there surface parking?
Surface parking.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that from the pictures. And then, let's see. It's very ambitious. I'm not sure you'll be able to put all these things in the end, but hopefully we'll do that. I think it's a good blend of a lot of things a community will need. I do think that you might need, wherever the pool ends up, I think you might need a drop-off area for the pool also. But other than that, it seems premature to comment too much when there isn't a project. So good luck with the rest, and I'll be looking forward to seeing what comes out in the end.
Oh, we lost our chair temporarily. Question for you before I get into some other things. Can you speak at all about other agencies thinking about shared village versus building in the park approaches? I mean, what are other similar-sized cities doing when they look at these trade-offs?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question? I didn't hear the first part.
What are other cities that you work with considering when they look at trade-off between a building in the park approach? I'm going back to the very beginning of your presentation, building in the park versus shared village approaches to this kind of community center.
I can answer that this whole notion of joining community facilities together with a school at the scale that we're talking about here is not universally done in this country. And as I said, there are schools that are being designed that become a little bit more like the gymnasium is shared or the auditorium is shared, but the notion of a more complete and wholesome shared facility is more unique.
Yeah, well, that's not really my question. My question is given that there are these different approaches that you proposed at the very beginning of your presentation. There was the independent campus versus the shared village versus the building in a park. And I'm just wondering what other agencies have thought about. I mean, our group apparently came to the shared village out of these three. That's what you said was the consensus. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, is that what other similar-sized communities are choosing when they look at these trade-offs? I'd just like to know what's the best practice.
Well, I think what Stephen was saying is I don't think there are a lot of communities that are doing this.
You're creating the best practice right here.
And so in Emeryville, I would say it's a shared use campus. I mean, that's one other example that we were designed that is a combination city school district collaboration. And
okay, so there's just not a lot of precedent.
No.
Is what you're saying. Okay,
But I can tell you that as relates to the function of these three different options, the notion of the school being completely separate from the community center kind of misses the option, misses the synergy that can be gained from that. And at the same time, putting everything into one building gets into knowing that it's going to be phased when you're trying to constantly add on to an existing building with construction. I think those are the two things that came up a lot around the tables as advantages and disadvantages, and probably what led to the
Okay, yeah, I was looking more for what other people were thinking. So one thing I would just say about this is that I've been on a number of building committees, and a constant struggle in facility planning, when you're looking out into the future, is how to develop a partie and a site plan with flexibility about program. Mm-hmm. Because we've had a lot of discussion about program tonight. I'm not going to comment on program because programs change. I mean, even over the 10 years it takes to develop this site, some of these programs may become more important, some may go away, who knows. And it's even harder to guess programs 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future. Right. And hard, impossible. Yeah. Which is why buildings become obsolete.
That's right.
And so something that I would urge you to do in this, I think that in a lot of these community meetings, you need to be fairly tangible in talking about, talking about phase one. But as you think about this, I'd urge you to think about flexibility, flexible space. Having a building that can only function as a health and wellness center, or can only function as a preschool, I think would be an error, because in 30 years, we may need twice as much of one and none of the other.
You're right.
And so, I don't know how much intentionality you're building, you're conceiving of here in this, but, I would just urge you to be, as unprogrammed as possible.
Yes.
If you happen to run into people who have been to the meetings, they would tell you that we say that numerous times at every meeting, that while we want to know the specifics of what they need and want, that what we ultimately want to design for is flexibility. And it's the very thing that you said. We have no way of knowing 10, 20, 30 years down the road what these buildings will be used
Yeah,
for.
no,
So it is something we've been saying all along. Just wanted to
And we
let
won't
you
be
know.
the architects, but we are very aware of, there's a whole movement that's just beginning in the architectural field called open buildings, and it's just addressing that exact purpose. I mentioned earlier about parking garages now with 12-foot floor-to-floor heights. You only need, 8 to 10-foot floor-to-floor heights for a parking garage. But if it's ever going to be anything but a parking garage, it better be 10 or 12 feet. So people are building parking garages now with those different additional heights because they don't want to be stuck with, a dumb building. The same is true of all buildings. And so there's a whole new movement that we're very much in touch with. We will incorporate those principles as much as we can on the planning side, where we're using building widths of 60, 70 feet. We're not making massive floor plates that can't be lighted or ventilated or whatever, as well as sustainable design practices.
Okay, it's good to hear that. So, given that, it's hard for me to say anything about circulation because, I think program evolves. It's just hard to know, what is the loading at different times of day given evolving programs. But one question I just want to make sure that you're considering is special requirements for circulation. For example, if you're envisioning that a building is a maker space or a performing arts space or visual space, I'm having trouble seeing how a loading dock fits into the site plans that you've envisioned. So just things like that. I just want to be sure that you're accommodating those kinds of special circulation requirements.
Yes, we are.
Good.
I had about a 30-minute conversation this afternoon about loading docks. So.
Okay, great. Well, let's not recapitulate it because there aren't a lot of us here.
It's not my favorite subject,
but you'll have some snoring if we go there. Okay, great. Well, my colleague loves loading docks. The other thing that I'm just a little confused about is, a performing arts space is inherently that's programmed. You need fly space, you need a whole bunch of special things, you need stage space. And so how is the community thinking about the coordination between this and other similar spaces? There's a new performing arts space in Palo, there's Lucy Stern, Stanford has built the Bing Theater. So, how are we supposed to think about this?
Well, I will say that, so the Community Services Department currently manages all the theater space owned by the city, which is the Children's Theater, Lucy Stern Theater, as well as the Cubberley Theater, and they are booked every day. There is demand for them. We have to turn people away who want theater space. So there is a demand in this community. There isn't, we don't have privileges of using the space at Palo or at Stanford. So we're really utilizing and maximizing the space that the city has right now.
So there's this is turned down. So there's there's program, there's a city program that is cognizant of what the needs are for these kind of spaces. That's just something I'm not aware
That's
of.
correct.
It's not part of this, it's not part of this packet. So I was a little, not sure what the right word is, but I just wasn't quite sure how to think about some of these and where some of these requirements are coming from.
Right, so they're coming from a couple of sources. One is the community feedback we've heard, but as Commissioner Lowing mentioned, there's the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Master Plan that was adopted by Council in 2017, and that involved a huge needs assessment for recreation programming, for parks programming, and so based on those two needs assessment efforts that we did, in addition to just our staff knowing and having to turn people away who, desperately need theater space for their theater groups, for their, the Palo Alto chamber orchestra uses the Cubberley space now. There's many different performing arts groups that use the space. And
Okay,
they
great.
need
No,
it,
that's
so.
great. And health and wellness is something that's an existing program, or?
Health and wellness, right now, there's a stroke rehabilitation and a cardiac therapy program at Cubberley.
But these are city programs, or?
So the city leases the space to those groups. And so, and there's, again, so additionally, Avenidas is leasing space from us now here at Cubberley while they're rebuilding downtown. And we've heard that it has, because they're now in this part of Palo Alto, the southern part, they're reaching a whole new group of people that typically weren't coming downtown Palo Alto. So it's the Health and Wellness Center. There's a strong component of senior health and wellness center in this, but it would be for all generations, but a very strong influence towards seniors.
Okay, but it's not a city program, is what you're saying?
Well, it could be. We don't know yet who's going to be here and who's going to be programming this site, but currently the city leases space at Cubberley now to different groups who then do the programming.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's really all that those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Wolfberger. So I guess summarizing some of other people's interoperability with other spaces is great, and just emphasizing that, more housing, looking at, being bold. I think those are all things that I would emphasize as well. Making sure it's a safe, secure space for people of all ages, I think is important. Flexibility also, I think, is an important thing to emphasize, and I'm glad. One of the things that I want to talk about relates in part to what Commissioner Wolfvogel brought up. So I got some detailed comments. Just want to run through real quick. With regard to the demographics of the survey, I actually think it does. I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think it'd behoove us to look at a Saturday. That wasn't mentioned just yet. I don't believe anybody brought it up, but I think that looking at outreach on a Saturday in May, I think you said May 9th was the target. If we could make that May 11th or May 18th, I think that would be really good for cultivating another subset of the community, or a Sunday. But I'll just throw that out there as a suggestion. Commissioner Long, we talked a lot about the great, preserving the fields and increasing fields. If you've actually been on many of the fields late fall, they're dirt. So I do think that we want to make sure that we're balancing out surfaces, and that's in the report. We're not talking about different types of surfacing right now. I think we want to consider that and think about whether or not we want maybe two of the larger fields to be additional turf fields and two to be natural. I do think that the wear and tear we have in this location, particularly in the winter months, they're not usable, and so and they could be usable if they were available, they would be used. And I can disclose that I'm a resident of Fairmeadow, and my kids go to Hoover, and I'm here almost every day. So I think that would improve the flexibility of the space as well. I just want to echo the comments of other commissioners. I think the mid-century character is important, and I don't think we brought up the fact, for the record, that this is, right adjacent to one of our few listed, historical register property in the city. So this is the one mid-century, or one of the two mid-century neighborhoods in the city. So I think that's important to note, to give credence to the mid-century style. I think the big thing that I want to say is and this relates to many of the people who talked about the massing. Specifically, I think that the east side of the site is under-massed. You can focus on imageability and increasing bulk on that site. You could create potential gateway on the east side of the site. So that whole middle field frontage, in my mind, could be much more dense and perhaps step back to more the neighborhood scale. I think that you really have an opportunity, particularly at both of the entrances, to create a more iconic massing gesture, and that's not reflected in the massing right now. That could be housing, it could be some other thing, but I think that there's, you can use architecture in that way to create an entrance, an informal entrance, a gateway, whether or not it's pedestrian, whether or not it's automotive. So I think that just consider that. I have to say, personally, I've been to enough corporate campuses where nobody walks that this feels like one of those. And I'll just say that my concern with the current building in a park layout is that the parks don't gesture as being usable for alternative uses other than landscape. There's occasional, I think you've sprinkled a little, playground here, and this is supposed to be a, informal seating area for meditation, amphitheater. I actually, quite candidly, I think that the independent campuses model, and I was hoping Commissioner Walfogel would go there from a massing standpoint, that creates more usable open space that does meet that flexible requirement. So, I guess in the spirit of being bold, I know you tried to pack as much on there as possible and be creative, but in terms of creating usable open space, not only do you create the usable open space, one of the things, the advantages, I think, of looking at that, and I'm just challenging us to think beyond what's been presented as a part of the, pre-final plan, is that part of the challenge with this site is that you can't see the playing fields from Middlefield. So there's no visual identity or to phrase, the Lynch phrase, imageability. If it's a wellness center and you have no clear identity of many of the wellness activities that are happening there, then it doesn't have the identity of a wellness center. Or if it's so I would actually figure out a way to funnel down maybe a visual approach from Middlefield to the actual fields, which you could accomplish with your independent campuses model. And I just think that's something that maybe you could finesse or key on as you cultivate the final design. Maybe there's another couple options to get explored. As we're talking about massing, a couple of the things I just want to point out. I think, like Commissioner Wolfogel said, I think it's really early to talk about circulation, which is why I'm surprised to hear you dismissing the route to San Antonio. And the reason is because I think that we have this site wrong from a housing standpoint. The fact that we're keeping Greendale where it is, I think, is a mistake. If we're really rethinking 40 acres, maybe that's the optimal site to put townhomes or low-density housing. And so if we're really being bold, maybe this corridor needs to go through, and that needs to become a neighborhood, and a neighborhood that may serve the people on this site. And then, one last thing, just regard to circulation. I'm not sure. I can't figure out why we're putting a parking structure not on Middlefield. I think there's a lot of precedent for ingress and egress right off a major corridor that would prohibit a lot of on-motive inflow and outflow from the site. And I think it would operate really well with control right turn out of the parking lot and then a left turn out on the southern egress. But, we don't have to talk about the circulation piece, but I actually think we probably ought to rethink the location of that site. I know these are more in the weeds than other people's comments, but I feel like it's important to get those out because I think they also really challenge what we're thinking about in terms of the existing status quo design. So, I know I just probably said more than I should normally in my chair role, but so with that, I'll just open it up for final comments from you all before we close this item. All right, seeing none, thank you very much, and we'll, I guess, start the next item if that's okay with my fellow commissioners. Keep rolling.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next up we have item number 3, which is an action item. Palo public comment is permitted on this item. We'll hear from staff first. We offer 3 minutes per speaker. This is the annual review of the comprehensive plan, including the housing element, and where our goal here is to recommend any changes or additions. And also this, I think that staff has indicated prior to the meeting that if there's any additional items we want to provide in writing, to feel free for that. So maybe we can introduce our new staff member.
So thank you, Chair. This will actually be a joint presentation. Myself and Hong Huen will be presenting this. So I'll cover the first part dealing with the comp plan, and then she's going to work on the housing element part. And in case, because this is your first time meeting her, she's our new senior planner who's responsible for our housing programs, and that's everything in its entirety that we're working on here. So she has a big role and a lot of responsibility here. So we're glad that she's here and joined us. How long has it been now? Like November?
2 months.
So she's getting up to speed. Okay, so this, I don't remember doing one of these reports before. I think this is an annual obligation that we have in our zoning code, also in state law now for charter cities. But I think because we were in the process of updating our comprehensive plan, we just never got around to doing these annual updates. So this is something that you can expect to see on an ongoing basis as we move forward. And so what we're interested in here, and it's a big report with a large attachment and a lot of fine print, and it may be that you look at this and you focus in on the area or two that you have maybe particular interest in or something that catches your attention. We made a comment in the staff report, and you may surprise me and go in a different direction, but our initial perspective was that since we've just updated the comprehensive plan as of 2017, November, we weren't anticipating that there'd be a lot of redirection or suggestion for amendments to policies or programs that have been adopted by the City Council. Again, you may surprise me and you may have some suggestions that we would certainly be happy to pass on to the City Council. So of the, well, as you can see on the slide, we've got 418 programs that were adopted in the comprehensive plan. That is ambitious. And I'm happy to say that we've made tremendous progress on completing, or at least partially completing, a good number of them. I would say, if you go by the percentages, we're a year ahead of schedule, assuming we finish those partially completed ones. And with the housing element, this is one that is an 8-year cycle, and we're actually doing really well on our housing element implementation as well, and we're happy to talk to you about some of that. So as I noted, this is it's been a local requirement, but it recently became a state requirement that applies to charter cities, and it's our intent to. These are two different sort of reporting cycles. The housing element, because of its regional significance and statewide significance, already had its requirements for reporting. And what we intend to do is join our other comp plan reporting to align with that, so that you can consider both of them in its entirety. Of course, you know that the housing element is a part of our comprehensive plan. In fact, here are the other elements that the comp plan consists of. We've put an asterisk next to housing just to let you know, presentation-wise, we're going to be covering that separately. So again, as we look at our progress in taking this document, which again, we're what, a year and 3 months roughly into its adoption, we've made some good progress on completing many of these and working with our other city departments in really advancing the objectives and interests of the city when adopting the plan. And one that, there's a couple that we'll highlight for you, and no one, more, prioritize, we don't prioritize these, but just for a sense for what's going on. Here we've got an ask to, a program that requires us to evaluate the cost effectiveness of going to a completely carbon neutral gas supply, and our utilities department has reported that they have achieved carbon neutrality in the fiscal year 2018. So kudos to them and the community for that. For emergency services, we have another program for expanded outreach and education in the event of significant events, and they've reported having completed over 149 public safety education events last year. So we're making, and these are ongoing. A lot of these programs are going to be ongoing efforts. For Public Works, household recycling continues to be significant. Our rates and the state are higher than other communities, and is higher than the Santa Clara County rate by about 4%. So we're making good strides in that regard as well. For community services, there's some interest in, we've identified interest in providing a range of vocations among different programs for different parts of our population. And again, you can see there that we've engaged over 2,100 children with various classes of different for our youth age groups. And then the commission, of course, is familiar with the efforts that have been made over the past couple of years related to the housing work program with the affordable housing overlay, the workforce housing, and more recently with the commission's work on those broad amendments to the CC, CS, and CD zones, as well as some changes to our multifamily zones that have taken place to address some increased densities. And we use this slide here as a transition to our housing element progress report. Good things to report here, but also some sobering numbers that I think we need to be mindful about as we go forward. So Hung, if you wouldn't mind.
So good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and fellow staff. I'd like to reintroduce myself. My name is Hung Nguyen. I'm the new Senior Housing Planner. So I just wanted to let you know that this is just a brief informational review of the annual progress report that's due to the state each year. Again, the housing element is a chapter in the comprehensive plan, and it's the only chapter that needs to be certified by the state. Again, it's also on a different cycle, 8-year cycle from 2015 to 2023. Oops. I think I could change here too. I just want to remind commissioners that about the regional housing needs allocation, or commonly known as RHNA. So each city has a RHNA goal. So the city of Palo Alto has a goal of 1,988 units, which we accommodate for in the housing element through housing inventory sites. I just wanted to remind you, because I'll refer back to RHNA in the upcoming slides. So there are 3 components of the annual progress report related to the housing element. The first being housing production via permitted units, and the state defines permitted units as building permits. And secondly, the city's progress towards the RHNA goals. And third, the status of the housing element programs. So before you see the production that the city has permitted in the past 4 years, from 2015, in particular with focus on 2018. So the city has permitted 54 units, net new dwelling units. And of that, 36 are ADUs, 14 are single-family homes, and 2 are new duplexes. So the second part of the annual progress report is our progress towards meeting the RHNA goals. So since 2014, we permitted 43 very low income units and all the way up to 304 above moderate units. Again, that's market rate units. So we've accomplished overall 22% of our RHNA goals. The last part of the annual progress report is our status in implementing the housing element programs. So in the housing element programs, these programs are encouraging housing production within the city. So the housing element laid out 72 programs in which we have 31 ongoing, 12 underway, and then down to 5 not completed. The city, again, has until 2023 to implement these programs. So before you are there 5 programs that have not been completed, and they may need further council direction. One being consideration of a transit-oriented development overlay. But also wanted to highlight some accomplishment from the housing element. These were actually stressed through citywide ordinances. So the city amended their below market rate ordinances. So they decreased the actual requirement from 5 units to 3 units. So now the threshold has decreased to allow for more BMR requirements over more units. Another is encouraging more development by amending the zoning requirements. So we adopted affordable housing combining district that allows recently for the Wilton project, 100% affordable housing project to be adopted by council. So this concludes staff really brief informational review of the annual progress report. I would like to turn it back to you, John, our new planning director.
Thanks. Chair, really back to you. We're happy to answer any questions that we can from the commission.
All right, so I think we have a member of the public that wants to comment. And we can go, 5 minutes going to be okay, or we have time?
Won't be more than a minute.
All right.
So the director mentioned that there are certain obligations that come with being a charter city. There also are certain exceptions that charter cities have, which are, I don't know, maybe a quarter of the cities in California. One of those exceptions is that a charter city does not have to have consistency between the comprehensive plan and the zoning code. And this has caused problems in the past. We've had projects that clearly were not consistent with the comp plan. Give you one example, Alma Plaza, 100% commercial, 90% retail, turned into 75% housing. One of the 4 neighborhood centers in the comprehensive plan. And there are many others. Cities have enacted ordinances, both by their council or by initiative, to require consistency between comp plan and zoning. It's perfectly logical and reasonable, and it is one of the reasons why, on the citizens' initiative to reduce the office cap to 750,000 square feet, we put in the zoning code as well as the comp plan adjustment. So anyway, it's something that should be followed as policy, but it also should be factored into code within the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. So seeing no other comment slips in front of me, I think we'll, if I don't see any disagreement from my fellow commissioners, maybe we'll go down the line again, just try to be efficient in terms of our questions and feedback. Commissioner Wolfolger, are you ready to go, or would you prefer me to keep?
You want a motion?
I don't think we need, do we need a motion for that to just go?
Well, no, but I mean, just to get a motion on in front of us, because this is an action item.
I think, well, why don't we just go down the line? If you want to make a motion, then we can see if there's a second. But I think, yeah, if you want to make a motion, that's fine, Commissioner Wolfolger.
Yeah, I just want to move the staff recommendation.
Do I have a second?
I actually have a question in terms of process to understand what the staff recommendation would be. I didn't know we were going to have a motion right away. But Is the objective tonight to pass on basically your report on the status? That's the main one, and then the second objective would be if there's any changes that we are going to suggest to the comp plan, that's a separate item?
You can certainly break it out that way if that's your interest. The motion, as I understand it, is to pass along the report that staff has prepared with all the attachments, which is satisfying the requirements for doing this update. If the commission thinks that, excuse me, not the update, but doing this annual report, if the commission thinks that it would like to forward some other, provide other policy direction or refinements to the council, that could be taken under the same motion or a separate motion.
Right. So that was my understanding of the two sort of objectives or outcomes for tonight. The first one seems relatively vanilla because it's your report and it's actuality, and the second one seems substantive, and therefore I thought that they should probably be separated.
So we have a motion on the floor. Can Chair
So
Long?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second, and if you don't, let's, so the motion on the floor, let's have a discussion, and then we can discuss things for the record, and then we can do a vote.
Yeah, that's fine, and after we do that, I may want to follow on with some discussion about this other part about comp plan review, but let's just get this, this part behind us.
All right, so do you have any further questions, Commissioner Wolford?
I do not.
Okay, Commissioner Suma.
So I'm a little confused. Are we speaking to the motion, or?
If you have any feedback on the plan, the motion on the table is on the report that was provided in your packet. Now's the time to talk to that.
Okay, so I'm happy to move bullet 1 ahead as it's your work progress to the city. Most of my comments would fall under bullet 2. So if it's appropriate, I'll just go ahead. Just so you know, packet page 65 has what I think is just an error on it that you might want to correct before it goes to council. And that is the second to the last H2.1.12 has the downtown and Cal-Ave area plans completed at the far right, so you might want to just correct that, because neither. H2.1.12. 12.
Oh.
It's just I just noticed it and thought you'd like to correct it. It's neither one has it. And then, in general, my comments sort of fall into line with comments of our member of the public this evening, our sole member. And that is, and so I can phrase these sort of in, so first of all, let me say, since I was on the comp plan group, I worked really, hard on it, and I hadn't read it for a while. So I was actually relatively happy to reread it and see that it has a lot of really good programs, goals, and policies. But I wonder if some of them are strong enough, and my concerns, there's 6 of them. One is retention of existing housing. So we have, for instance, 8.1.2, 8.3.1.9. I don't know how much detail you need me to go into, and also, but I don't know that those goals, and maybe it's because the comp plan is not aligned with the municipal code in every way, but I do worry about retention of existing housing and whether we have strong enough policies to do that. And also, my second point was retention of development standards for transition. We have very strong statements about that in the housing element. Retention of neighborhoods serving businesses, retail-like, and services. We have pretty strong language about that in land use, but I worry that we're losing a lot of that just through the municipal code and other practices, maybe. So much of what we where we want to build more housing depends on fixed transit, which is downtown and Cal Ave, but I'm very concerned that there's not a strong enough in the housing element or transportation element, that there's not strong enough language about working with VTA to keep bus routes that we really, really need if we're going to base housing on it. And then finally, I'm concerned that some of the policies we have are inconsistent with retention of open space, which is not just, and the quality of our open spaces, which is not just actual open space like baylands and in the hills, but is also backyard habitat. I worry about inconsistencies in our ordinances that are allowing more and more impermeable portions of backyard habitat and losing that, which is very important for animals and bugs, and it's kind of a worldwide problem right now. So at a high level, those are my concerns, and I see a lot of the protections, except I do think we need to put stronger language about working to retain bus routes and increasing bus routes, because that and the Caltrain, that is all we have in addition to the commuter train. So I think that needs to be added, and I think the rest of them, the concerns I have either need to be, there need to be policies that work a little harder on those, or that we need to align some of these goals with our municipal code. So without going into more detail about specific programs and policies and goals, I will leave it at that.
Commissioner Templeton.
I'm sorry, if I can, so just so we're, I want to be helpful to the point that if there's, so I appreciate those comments, and at some point, I'd be interested in a motion from the commission if there was a shared interest in making a recommendation to council about additions, deletions, or strengthening.
I think we've, Commissioner Suma's provided some suggestions. I think what I'd like to see, we have a motion on the floor, and maybe there'll be some consensus to, some consensus around a shared recommendation, or I think what was suggested earlier that we could potentially have a second motion following voting on your recommendation with some additional comments was, I think, process-wise, that might be encompass some of what Commissioner Suma has suggested previously. Is that okay? Okay. Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. Just looking on page 15 at the chart of the building activity, in general, I feel like there's a lot of quantitative analysis offered in your report. Is there any intention to include any qualitative, as it has changed dramatically from 2015 to 2018? When you send this to council, will there be any analysis about why?
Well, I'm sorry, can you tell me what page number you're on?
15.
I'm sorry?
15.
Packet page 15, or, on the PowerPoint slide?
Oh, slide 15, I apologize, thank you.
Okay, and I'm sorry, your question again? So yeah, this is a qualitative analysis, and so what would the this is a quantitative analysis, what would the qualitative element be? Or
do you intend, when you send this to council, to include any thoughts on why it has changed so dramatically from 2015 to 2018? In terms of the number of units built?
Yeah, I don't know. I will say this. As far as the reporting to HCD, it's a very prescribed methodology, and our first objective is to meet their standards. In fact, their template now is so immense that we weren't even really, I mean, you have it in here, but it's illegible, right? I mean,
yeah,
so we've
right.
Hopefully we've linked it
okay.
in the, to an online. So the short answer is, we may do that.
It may not be required for the RENA reporting.
It's not required for the reporting, but we may have an interest in doing that. And we have sort of like this parallel process that we're trying to implement, and I'm not sure we're going to get to it this year, but it's our intent to give the commission and the council sort of a little bit more information about sort of trends that are happening that relate to a variety of land use issues, and housing, of course, being one of them. And in addition, our housing work program, which has this objective of some 300 and some odd units per year being achieved. We're clearly not on that trajectory just yet.
Right, yeah, I appreciate that. I think that if you do have a variation of this report that is suited for that discussion in the future, you may want to go back a few more years and see if this was a spike or if it's a cliff. I think that would be really useful input, and any thoughts that our new staff member, Ms. Nguyen, thank you for joining the team. That's my only question, thank you.
Commissioner Olczyk?
Okay, so quick question, or a few quick questions about how do we certify? How does this certification relay our sort of failure to meet the goal, and what are the consequences of that, and how does the certification sort of address that discussion? Is it just numerically, here's where we are, we've zoned for this, right? We met that requirement when we got our housing element certified in the first place. So this recertification is just like a status report on how we've progressed?
Yeah, I probably won't use the word certification. It's an annual report. Okay. And it's just to show the progress that we're making toward this effort.
And is there any component of it that is required to address ways to improve, let's say, dramatic gaps between the expectation and the... Does it offer suggestions on what we could do? Are we supposed to maybe articulate efforts to address the gap?
So not with the annual report. We do that as a part, when we do our updates to the housing element. So in the next few years, when we're tackling that challenge, we're going to take a look at our, ability to have met some of these areas and see if there's, continued government constraints or other issues that are precluding us from getting there. But I think what we're also seeing is some changes at the state level. And notably with SB 35, the reporting requirements have changed with respect to this document that we're producing this time around. And our production of above moderate housing is something that the state is tracking and has implications with the streamlining provisions of state law. And so while this report doesn't necessarily get to an analysis of what you're speaking to, there's other elements coming into play that are causing cities to have to take a look at that.
Would it be possible to put the table up that has the number? Okay, so of the 54, those are what, permits issued? Of the 54 permits issued, do we know how many are replacing existing single-family structures?
Replacing single-family what?
Structures. Like, are these permits?
These are all net new numbers.
Net new numbers, meaning it's not some single-family home that's tearing down and building a new single-family home.
That's right.
So this 54 is essentially the project at Page Mill in El Camino.
I don't know about that. I'll tell you, I think, and you may have the actual number, but I think there's some like 34 of these units are attributed to ADUs. Is that correct?
Yeah. So of the 54, 36 are ADUs and 14 are new single-family homes, and 2 are duplexes. So these are building permits.
Okay, so what about that project, that workforce housing project that was Windy Hill? Did that get?
They haven't pulled permits yet.
Yeah.
They haven't pulled permits yet?
Yeah.
But they're approved?
No, they got their land use planning.
They got their land use, so they still have to essentially submit a set of plans, and once that process goes through, we would get credit for those 50.
That's right.
50, I had just assumed it was 54. Yeah, it's somewhere around there. 58, maybe. Okay, so did you say 16 single-family homes?
14 single
14?
family.
Are those the Maybell site? What are those? Those are the Maybell site.
Yep.
Got it. And the ADUs are 36. Okay. All right. So I guess I don't think there's much to say here except this, I guess my point would be I wouldn't wait 2.5 years to have a focused dialogue about what governmental elements in our system are maybe creating barriers. Maybe there's a opportunity here to when this, because I suspect that the next step for this is to go to council, and then they take either accept our recommendation, or I imagine they will accept our recommendation and direct you to issue that report. But I think it would be advisable to include in that presentation any ideas you have now, without spending obviously the amount of time that you will when you reevaluate in 2 years. Maybe that's a more focused articulation, but we've found that we have a hurdle in our process with respect to ADU submissions that we could have seen so many more. I don't know. Maybe there's some easy low-hanging fruit that could be identified in that presentation. That council could say, these are some interesting points, and why don't we have the Planning Commission review solutions to them? I don't know.
Yeah, so
I don't want to wait 2 years
and
to come up with an idea of how to get more than 36 ADUs. The 14 site is kind of a one-off.
Absolutely. And I don't think we're waiting for that period. We have the Housing Work Program, which lays out a number of, that takes the comprehensive plan and has very prescribed asks that we go and do. And you are just part of a process where we made significant changes to our downtown zoning. And so I think part of this is continuing to work on that Housing Work Program, see what kind of attention the changes that we have made generate in the community. And so I think we're actively looking toward that. With respect to ADUs, we're still evaluating that process too, and trying to find ways that we can even streamline it where we are, because I think the process is actually taking a little bit longer than it ought to, and I don't want that to be a reason why somebody is discouraged from filing an ADU application. So we continue to look at those issues. I only mentioned that thing about the every 2 years because that's, we're mandated to do that, but you're right, we are, and we are implementing and reviewing other changes to advance our comp plan objectives.
Yeah, and I support the motion. The staff, in my view of this staff recommendation, I agree with the sentiment that we're a little early to start editing. I think it's hard to sort of appreciate what's a problem and what needs to be fixed yet. I don't know that I guess I would want to hear staff articulate some bottlenecks or conflicts before I came up with them, essentially. So to the extent that the motion is to not make those changes, I support that too in some regard. The one thing I'd say, if I, in addressing, council's discussion about this, would be that I think that this very disappointing 2018 performance, they should have a discussion about it. I think the incident with the President's Hotel presents them with an opportunity, presents our leadership with sort of an opportunity to maybe create some momentum in inviting residential developers to reconsider Palo Alto in 2019 and 2020. And I think that the way our council could do that is by creating a framework in our downtown for another residential building very similar to the President's Hotel to be built. And that would essentially explode our current height limits and parking requirements. But I think there's a real opportunity here based on all the affection for the President's Hotel as a residential building that we've seen in the community to maybe sort of piggyback on that and say, maybe we should consider some overlay in our transit-oriented sort of corridor here to consider a high-rise residential building. I'm just saying that I think a part of the discussion that they have on this topic might want to include some brainstorming on addressing the gap in the requirement and our realized issued permits. That's it.
I have no comments on the pending motion.
Okay, just briefly, and as the seconder, I definitely think these two sort of subjects should be decoupled, and so we're talking about the first one now. The first one seems to me to be...
Can I interrupt you, Chair? I think the motion on the floor was not to decouple them, so if you had a misunderstanding, we should go back. Okay, so we should get clarity on your motion just to make sure the seconder is clear. Staff recommendation, motion to support staff recommendation only meant the housing element. Is that you just want to make sure we're clear on the motion?
Yeah, the staff recommendation is that the Planning and Transportation Commission review this report and all attachments before recommending it for City Council's review. So this is on packet page 49. There's nothing in the recommendation regarding comp plan review. So that's my motion, is to forward the staff recommendation, and I said that if we need to, we can have a separate motion. We can have a separate motion around comp plan review, and I do have a couple of comments about that, which I'll bring up after we dispatch this first one.
Correct, and that's what I seconded.
Okay, that's fine. Just want to make sure we're clear.
Right, so on the first motion, I think we should just be clear in that the wording should be something like PTC has reviewed the APR and suggests that staff forward it to council. So I don't know what we're recommending as opposed to just forwarding, because we're not changing anything or commenting on it. As corrected. That's fine.
Yeah,
I guess I don't
I
understand.
feel like we're overcomplicating it. We've reviewed the comp plan and the housing element.
Right.
We have this document, and we're advancing that. And if there's, I guess there is a two-prong sort of, any errors? We have one error that we need to correct here. Are there any other errors?
And Chair's prerogative, I probably wouldn't know this. I think this was presented as a package, and our planning director was asking for us to give it consideration as a unit. I guess I didn't understand, and I probably would have clarified your recommendation, but we already have a motion on the floor. Let's just proceed with this. I think, if you, Chair Loing, sorry, I want to call you Chair still. If you have any other comments, we'll take them, and I think that we just vote on this motion and then consider the second. So I apologize.
So the only other thing I was going to suggest is that you may want to take an extra step besides just the reporting requirements and move beyond that and pick out 3 or 4, whatever the right number is, of those areas that are, substantially unfilled, and do sort of a, these are 4-hour high priorities, and we need to move on these, and we're going to accelerate action. The one we talked about is an obvious example that we're low on this. What can we do to really accelerate that? So you just might use the opportunity that they're going to be looking at this, and they're going to probably be asking you, wow, what can we do to mitigate this or to move it forward, and just be proactive is all I'm suggesting. But that's not part of the motion. That's just, we can't dictate that. So that would be the only comments that I have on that.
All right, I'd like to call the motion. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. All right, so I'm going to turn it back to you, Commissioner Wolfogel, since you kind of created structure at this point.
Thank you. Surprised that you didn't include the text of 1904-030 in the Muni Code in the staff report, because that's the enabling legislation for the review of general plan. Planning Commission shall annually review the general plan and recommend to the City Council such extensions, changes, or additions to the plan as the Commission may consider necessary in the view of any change in conditions. And I agree that we're pretty early in this general plan, but this was a 1962 initiative, so I think that we should take it fairly seriously. But that said, I don't think that spitballing ideas from the dais is the right way to approach this. So maybe we can just have a brief conversation about what the right approach might be. I mean, my recommendation is to set up a committee to report out recommendations, particularly around this concept of changing conditions. But I'd just like to hear what other people think about how we should do this, because it's a pretty open-ended process against, you know, a several hundred-page comprehensive plan, and I don't think we just want to bring in random ideas.
So if I could just, you know, echo our new planning director's guidance on this. This is an annual update. This is every city in California, well, every city that I've interacted with does this. It's I don't know if it's a statutory requirement. Is it a statutory requirement?
It is now, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel, my suggestion is for us not to overthink this, to move the status update, the implementation update, and then have a dialogue, and that would be my recommendation, and I think that's what you're hearing from your planning director as well.
I'll second that.
Sorry, there's not a motion on the floor.
I know.
Commissioner Long.
Yes. If the concern is that we immediately do something tonight or not at all, I don't think that's the right process. If the concern is that we should wait years, I don't think that's the right process. So I think that we've already addressed the required update, but we might take 6 months in, for example, a committee like Commissioner what's your name again? Wolfogel suggested, to just kind of take a look at things, or we could decide that it's too early. But I don't think that there's any action tonight that's required on recommending no updates throughout the course of the year. I think that that's already been accomplished by the first motion. So your suggestion, Commissioner Wolfogel, was sort of resonates positively with me on some sort of time frame to be discussed.
Yeah, let's just see if there's any consensus, and then we can craft a motion if we need to.
Sorry, I think if we have Commissioner Suma would like to speak.
Thank you. And I apologize because when I referred, I thought the motion that was being moved forward was the one from slide, which was a little bit different, and that's why I referred to bullet 2 and spoke to some of my concerns. But I was a little confused by this item because while referring the required APR to council is a boilerplate action, and of course we would do that, then it seemed a little open-ended to, like, were we going to discuss the whole comp plan, and we couldn't obviously do that tonight. So I kind of went through and just identified a few concerns I had, but I'm happy to support Commissioner Waldfogel's idea of having a committee that looked into this. And it is kind of early, I think, to do it, because the comp plan's pretty new. But I did have concerns, so I shared them. So that's where I am.
Commissioner Olczyk.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment here. I just think that it's premature. I think the tone in the packet is that many of the sort of larger comprehensive plan programs, longer-term, mid-term programs haven't even really been implemented yet. We're still at sort of the toddler phase of this plan, and we are not going to get a response from our planning department with specific ideas on how to revise it because they haven't really had ample time to do it. So let me ask this question to you. I mean, let's assume we didn't have some motion right now. In your mind, when do you think we would begin to review these types of issues? Is there, would it be appropriate to assume that this time next year we would have a better sense of programs or policies that we could amend or consider adjusting at the meeting that we're in right now next year?
That's certainly possible. I don't have any, I defer to the chair on this. I don't have any objection for like a standing committee that maybe meets quarterly to kind of review the document, and maybe we've got changes to make, to recommend to council or not. But, it's hard to get engaged in that one night, where we're like 2 months out from having to report this to the state. So I do think that there's some value in having, somebody sort of monitoring that, or a group of people monitoring that. So
yeah, so I guess that would be my response to the sort of energy on the dais tonight. If there is an interest in in-depth sort of a reevaluation, I think those motivated should put their hat, should suggest exactly that, maybe convening some committee to review. And I think a more appropriate time to make those recommendations would be maybe at the conclusion of 2019, in anticipation of having it come before this body in the second month of actually in whatever time frame makes sense for you to be able to potentially incorporate those whatever things you need to do in order to still meet this deadline of the report. So I'm not suggesting we put it off for a year. I'm suggesting that we spend more time with it and then bring it back at an appropriate time when we can review it and still participate in this process before the next the next report. I guess that's a motion, but it's not really a motion because I think the people who are interested in participating in that subcommittee should make that motion.
Okay, you can make a motion, but it's not a motion. So let's not confuse the record anymore with fake motions. Let me just say that just an idea that it might be an opportunity to dialogue this at the long-awaited retreat. And we are very close to a date, so this could be a time where we could maybe get make some assignments about if there's critical mass around this type of topic. Maybe we could make some assignments for a subcommittee of some sort. I think that'd be a great suggestion, but I want to turn it over to Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you. I have a clarification. Director Lay, were you asking for us to give fresh input on the comprehensive plan, or to approve your progress report with regards to our progress on the comprehensive plan?
So so both, I guess, on, one is the report and, did we get it right in terms of our status and all these kinds of things. But the commission does have a responsibility or authority to review the plan and recommend, changes or additions that the commission considers necessary.
Is that in any way time limited to tonight, or do we always have that ability?
It's part of no, it's not time limited. Okay. It's part of the annual review process. And so I guess our sentiment in the staff report was, this is our first report on the comp plan that we've just adopted. So we weren't expecting, I don't think the expectation is that the commission's, rewriting this and sending a bunch of recommendations to council. I think it's we've reviewed these policies. We're seeing a misalignment in, this policy with community values. Council, we think that you might want to think about adjusting, modifying, or adding some new policies, as opposed to, let's completely revisit the land use section because, for whatever the reasons are. That kind of direction I would suspect we would get from council. So I think we're fine. The idea is like you're fine tuning it along the way. Is sort of my read of that.
Would it still be appropriate for us to approve your report for conference to the council and still have our own conversation about it? Okay.
Yeah.
If that's the case, I'd like to make a motion to say that we have reviewed and commented on your progress report for the comprehensive plan and send that to council.
Yeah,
I think you, so you're moving the staff recommendation, is that correct?
That's correct. The other half.
The first half of the two-pronged recommendation. Do I have a second for that motion? And then we will go to you, Commissioner Wolfvogel. Is there a second for that motion?
Sure, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, but Commissioner Wolfvogel, you have the floor.
It seemed to me that we're getting to broad consensus that, and by the way, committees are at the chair's discretion. It's chair's discretion to establish committees, chair's discretion to staff committees. So we don't even need a motion to move forward the proposal that you were making. So, as far as I'm concerned, we've accomplished our goals.
Commissioner Lang.
I would just like clarity on the motion, because I thought we unanimously referred the report that's necessary, and that's really all the action that we need to take, because we can always look at the comprehensive plan anytime we want. That's one of our core responsibilities. So I just don't understand the reason for this one.
So the purpose for tonight, and Planning Director Long, I need you to pay attention to my words, because I'm going to paraphrase you. Is to make a staff is making a recommendation or providing an update on the comprehensive plan, and an update that has to be reported to the state on our progress towards the housing element. All we're doing is we're saying we looked at that. I think this is what we're approving that and referring it to council with comments. Am I characterizing our role that? And we chose to split it up. And I think for one reason is we do want to have a deliberate dialogue about how we're evolving the general plan. But that was just the way the motion was made.
Thanks for stating that to see if it corroborates, because I'm not certain that we have to say anything on the comp plan since we haven't even discussed it. So that's my question. And I don't see why it's necessary for that reason.
Okay, so so you've had a motion and you voted on it to, in essence, move the staff report. So that's been done. And as I recall, Commissioner Waldfogel's recommendation.
We did not move the full staff report.
Well, you recommended the report.
Yes, yes.
And Commissioner Waldfogel had commented that if necessary, there could be another motion to direct staff to forward onto the City Council any refinements or suggested changes to the comp plan onto the City Council. So on this last motion that's on the floor, I don't know that we need it, because I feel like we've acted on that motion already. And unless there was a specific set of recommendations that you want to forward onto the City Council for consideration in this annual review, I think that would be appropriate to have that conversation. But what I also heard was that at the retreat, you want to talk about whether you want to form a committee to work with staff over the course of some period of time, so that for the next annual report, we're well positioned to forward a set of recommendations onto the council, should that be necessary.
Thank you. Okay, as long as you're fine that that first motion was clear enough that it moved your recommendation, then I think that we're fine. It wasn't clear that the motion hadn't been made in a clear way, so, but I think that we have our attorney here, and we should defer to him that it's clear enough. Albert, was the first motion?
May I speak?
I think we have enough direction, yeah.
May I just to clarify, there was some ambiguity going on here because what was in slide 21 and what was in the packet didn't match in terms of the motion, and we wanted to make sure you had full coverage. If you feel you have full coverage, I can withdraw the motion.
Yeah, thank you. And it points out just a need for us to make sure that we're aligning our staff report with our PowerPoint presentation, so I'll make sure that we're double checking that piece.
Thank you. Sorry about that confusion, you guys.
And I think that was the chair's confusion as well.
Okay. So did I hear that you had withdrawn your motion? Okay.
So the motion is withdrawn. I do have another comment for this, but any other comments from my fellow commissioners? So I would just ask that we ask staff, particularly staff, to take a transportation lens on some of these. I think that we are accomplishing some of the items that are assigned to community development that have a transportation focus. So I think that just go through again what is assigned to community development, and I think it's what's happening is we're assuming Public Works is checking those off. So just make sure, I would just double check that. All right, do we have any director's update? I think there's a couple administrative things. 836. Actually, we have minutes, right? Approval of minutes?
No.
There's no items.
Oh, the Embarcadero?
Well, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, if we could have a motion.
I'll move to continue that item to a date uncertain.
That's right.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Okay.
Everyone.
Yep, appreciate that. But no minutes.
Okay, no minutes, no committee items. Questions, comments, announcement, future addenda items?
I have one. As we're looking at the next agenda, which is later this month, we had an item that it turns out we're not going to be prepared for, and that was the 470 Olive. So at this point, February 27 doesn't have any items. Now, I know that we've got these discussion items about the co-working and the legislative updates, but it's going to be difficult for us to get that prepared for next week and have it submitted into a packet for the commission.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
We don't have any items for February 27th at this point. If the commission wants to meet and have a discussion on any of its items, we can certainly do that. I just thought it might be helpful if we can frame some of those that dialogue with some kind of a report and some initial analysis, but we can, I defer to the chair and the commission on how you want to approach that. We can either cancel that meeting or we can schedule something that doesn't require some significant report generation.
So Commissioner Lawing and then Commissioner Alcheck.
Do we have any visibility a little bit further down the pike on what's coming? For example, you know, this crucial aspect of the next section of the Affordable Housing Ordinance with the BMR and the Palmer Act and so on. I know you said last year you were actually making great progress on that. So, and as we head towards March, is that when we're going to see this, or do you know yet?
No, there's a lot going on in our department right now,
yeah.
And we have a number of vacancies, and we're having to really refocus our our priorities on how we're addressing these. I'm not confident that we're going to get to all of the 2019 housing work plan priorities. And so that's the conversation I'm having with the city manager about what we're able to accomplish with our resources that we have. In addition to, this effort, we also have, we're also merging departments too. And so that's another administrative task that we're having to address. But I need to get back to you on that and sort of see if we can't give you a schedule of what we can expect. As you know from last year, it's kind of a moving target with the tentative agenda.
It's a what target?
A moving target, the tentative agenda.
Yeah. And then I think there was something that council referred to us on parking as well. That's right. So is that sort of first quarter, or do we know that yet? I'm not trying to push you, I'm just trying to get a feel of what's coming up.
Yeah, I need to get you a summary. I don't have an answer for you on that right now.
Okay.
Commissioner Alcheck, do you still?
Yeah, so I guess what I would say, my recommendation would be that we table this discussion for a few minutes and have a quick discussion about potential retreat options, because in the absence of finding a date maybe that works for everyone, I assume Wednesday the 27th is open, but that would be my suggestion.
Commissioner Suma.
I did want to report that there was a North Ventura CAP meeting. It was the first community meeting, but I was not able to go. So if Director Late wanted to share something about it.
Sure. I just want to keep us, I'm happy to respond to that. I'm wondering, Chair, if we want to finish that conversation about the retreat.
It's fine. We'll just get the update, and I'm going to look a couple things up while you're doing it.
Okay. So yeah, we had our retreat. We had a number of working group members attend, but we also had some community members come out and participate in sort of an open house style meeting, along with an interactive activity with these little handheld clickers, which was kind of nice. It gave some instant gratification to pushing in a response and seeing how your response paired with other folks that were in the room. And I'm not remembering the whole list. There was about half a dozen questions that were asked, but I think there was a report out on that in the local paper. And there seemed to be, continued interest in providing housing. We wanted to reaffirm sort of the overall visioning of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan goals and approach. And there seemed to be support for that general direction, a need for housing. There was some willingness to consider additional height, but there was clearly a sentiment of wanting to preserve the existing sort of neighborhood character of the area. And it also explored connectivity and some other elements that we're exploring. None of it was intended to be necessarily direction setting, but it was trying to help us identify in broad terms some scenarios that would be explored further. And so following that exercise, there was small group discussions that had a chance to dive more deeply into some of these areas. So on March, let me just double check the date. On March 11, there is, we're working on a town hall that focuses in on Ventura neighborhood. And a component of that will be specifically with the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. And this satisfies the requirement of the code for the working group to meet with the council members. And so we're going to do that, but also anticipate having a broader conversation about Ventura neighborhood. So that's a meeting that we're hoping to schedule, and we'll certainly notify the Planning Commission with some details about that.
All right, thank you. Any other announcements, and then we can get back to the maybe potentially scheduling a retreat? So one thing before we do that, Commissioner Olczyk did a lot of hard work, and thank you or I keep wanting to call you Commissioner, Vice Chair Alchek did a lot of work mapping out assignments for council. Make sure you take a look at that. If we need to do some switching around, I think he was definitely trying to respect our newer members and give them a little more easing into the process. But that's on one of the handouts that's in front of you. So take a look at that and let us know in terms of feedback.
You're giving me a little bit more credit than I deserve. I just wrote everybody's name in sequential order.
And yeah, we did talk, but all right. So I just had some conversations. It looks like we threw out a couple Mondays. It looks like, and let's just confirm this, that Monday the 4th might work for all of us from I believe 11 to 2 is what we're talking about. And if we can just maybe all dynamically look at our calendars and see if that's a possibility.
What's the date again?
Was it Monday, March 4th?
Right.
And I believe it worked for, that we had one person that I wasn't sure if it worked for them, but I think it works for all of us now.
What time?
11 to 2. So if that works, yeah, okay, great. So it looks like we have a time for a retreat from 11 to 2. And
So we're trading the Wednesday night for, like, we won't have to meet on Wednesday the 27th?
That's correct. So everyone's spouses can be very happy that you will be home on the 27th. We will meet on the 4th for our retreat. And let's just, I don't want to make it unanimous, but I'll move that we cancel that the February 27th due to lack of items. And I don't know that do I need to make a motion for that, or okay, thanks.
And so, hold on, and that works for you guys, obviously, right?
Yes, Yolanda, thanks. All right, I think that was our last item. So it is 8:46, and I believe that we are adjourned.